Irvin met Pamela by chance in the supermarket, where he dropped in one evening after work. He took his usual brisk step towards the refrigerator with half-cooked food. The man was in a hurry and accidentally hit someone's cart at the fridge. He apologized and smiled at its owner, a pretty young woman. She smiled back, letting him know everything was okay, and went to another department. But at the checkout, Irvin suddenly felt someone push him in the side. When he looked around, he saw the same young woman again. She was so engrossed in what she was reading on her smartphone that she wasn't looking ahead at all. "Oh, you might as well pass the counter," joked Irving. "Oh, I'm sorry," the woman was embarrassed, and looking at the man, she laughed merrily. Irvin also smiled and noted to himself how pretty she was. And then, on the street, already standing near his car, Irvin saw the stranger coming out of the store with a heavy bag. Suddenly, the bag burst and all of its contents fell out onto the pavement. Irvin ran to the woman at once, bought her a new bag, and while they were picking up the food, the two young people got to know each other and got to talking. That was how they began to date. Pamela was beautiful and smart, and for the first time in his life, the young man fell in love. Soon the young people got married. The only guests at their wedding were his wife's relatives and a few of Irvin's friends, and a couple of Pamela's colleagues from work. Irvin had no relatives. He was raised by his grandmother after his parents had died, but she had already died too. Pamela's relatives were cheerful and boisterous at the wedding, and only her mother, Mrs. Morgan, was serious. At one moment, she took her son-in-law aside and, anxiously observing her wildly merry daughter, asked Irvin to keep an eye on her and not give her much freedom, because her daughter, like her father, loved to attend parties too much. Irvin was very surprised of such words and almost immediately put the unsolicited advice out of his mind. He was sure that his wife loved him, and he even liked her cheerful and sociable character. A year after the wedding, Irvin hinted to his wife it was time for them to have a baby. In fact, Pamela did not want to think about it, but did not show it. Meanwhile, Irvin was happy. He had a warm, friendly relationship with his mother-in-law. He spent a lot more time with her, he helped her in everything, and they often sat in the kitchen and talked. Mrs. Morgan told him about her years as a school teacher, about the fate of her students, and Irvin listened and smiled. He felt so good with this woman, as if he was communicating with his own mother. Pamela sometimes resented her husband for his frequent contact with her mother, even though she herself rarely came to see her. Irvin tried to explain to his wife, "Pamela, your mother is over 60. She has arthritis, diabetes. It's hard for her to be alone." "Diabetes? Since when?" the woman asked in surprise. "It's been 3 months, don't you remember? She told you in front of me on the phone when I was visiting her." "Yeah, maybe. Things are so complicated at work right now. My head is spinning." Irvin only shook his head reproachfully, thinking to himself that his wife should have been more attentive to her mother. He even offered Mrs. Morgan to come live with them, but she flatly refused. "Oh no, Irvin, Pamela and I won't get along. As long as I can live without any help, I'll live alone. And Pamela, I won't be able to keep quiet. I'll start teaching her, and she has an explosive character. We'll only fight." Irvin was very surprised at his mother-in-law's answer, because Pamela was a gentle and kind angel to him. He did not interfere in the relationship between the women. And then disaster struck. One day, he and his wife were driving from their friends. Irvin had been drinking a little this time, and Pamela was at the wheel. "Pamela, why are you suddenly speeding so fast? Slow down," remarked Irvin worriedly. "Come on, relax," laughed Pamela, and turned to her husband. "Slow down," shouted Irvin in horror, seeing the woman ahead on the crosswalk. Pamela turned around in bewilderment and in fright. Instead of braking, she hit the gas. There was a thud, and the woman at the crossing was thrown to the side. Irvin helped his wife stop the car. "Oh my God," cried Pamela, clutching onto the steering wheel. I killed her." But Irvin wasn't listening to her anymore. He jumped out of the car and ran to the victim. She was alive but unconscious. Irvin called an ambulance, the police. "Irvin, honey," Pamela sobbed on her husband's shoulder next to the injured woman, waiting for the doctors and cops. "I'm scared. They'll put me in jail. No, I don't want to. How could this happen?" "Quiet, Pamela. Calm down. The main thing now is for her to live. We'll get the best lawyers." "Irvin, listen to me. I can't go to jail. I'm pregnant. I just wanted to tell you about it today to make you happy." Irvin was shocked and began to think feverishly. He understood that Pamela could be imprisoned, and he could not allow her to go through such an ordeal being pregnant. So he decided to take the blame. Soon Irvin was arrested, since alcohol was found in his blood and the victim's condition remained severe. The sentence was severe, and he was given several years in a penal colony. Only his mother-in-law was in the courtroom. She came to support her beloved son-in-law, but Pamela was absent. Time in prison dragged very slowly, and only letters from home warmed Irvin's soul. Pamela wrote and told him that the injured woman was alive, but left an invalid. Irvin realized then that he was unlikely to get out on parole, but he was only concerned about Pamela. He kept asking his wife in his letters if she knew the gender of the baby, but she wouldn't answer. And then one day she just wrote that, unfortunately, they weren't going to have a baby. She had a miscarriage because of all the worries. Irvin was almost close to despair, but managed to pull himself together. They decided that they would have everything all right, and that he would definitely help the unfortunate woman who had been left disabled through their fault. But first, he must get out of prison. Mrs. Morgan also wrote to Irvin, and her letters were so heartfelt and kind. The woman was motherly in her support for Irvin, worried whether he was okay. "Don't worry about me, Mrs. Morgan," wrote Irvin. "Everything's all right with me. You should definitely keep an eye on your sugar levels. They'll probably run out of test strips for the glucometer I bought. Don't skip, get some quality ones." He really hoped that in his absence, Pamela would pay more attention to her mother. But about 6 months later, a letter arrived from Mrs. Morgan that shook Irvin to his core. "My dear son-in-law, I would be pleased if you were my child. It's a sin to write this, but sometimes I'm ashamed that I gave birth to Pamela. When you and she married, I thought she had settled down, and it seemed so, but in fact, it turned out that she hadn't, Irvin. She's been going around with men since high school. I scolded her, but it was no use. She didn't listen to me. That's why my relationship with her was complicated. And then you came along and I thought everything would change. But no. When you went to jail, she went crazy. Different men came to see her. I don't want to keep quiet about it anymore. I know it's hard for you to know, but I don't want to leave with this burden because you're more close to me than my daughter. Irvin, I'm dying. I got a tumor 2 months ago. It's very aggressive and growing fast. Anyway, the doctors can't do anything. I have a month or 2 left at most. I am in a hospice now. I have been writing this letter for a few days now. It's very hard, Irvin. I want to ask you one thing. When you get out of jail, go to my cemetery and dig my grave. Do it for sure. You'll understand everything later. Irvin reread the letter several times. He was very hurt by his wife's infidelity, but his mother-in-law's strange request puzzled him. He came to the conclusion that the unhappy woman must be completely out of her mind because of her illness if she writes such things. Sometime later, Irvin was summoned by the head of the colony and told that new circumstances had emerged in his case, and it was being sent for reconsideration. It turned out that the injured woman came to her senses and remembered that there was a woman at the wheel. She was very priggish and didn't want to let an innocent man serve his sentence, so she achieved a review of the case herself. Irvin was brought to court, and the injured woman, whose name was Nina, testified, which determined the further course of the case. The surveillance tape that miraculously survived also played an important role. No one had ever watched it before because Irvin himself confirmed his guilt. In the end, Nina's testimony and the tape left no doubt that Pamela was driving the car. When she was accused, she tried to get out of it. She cried, shouted, blamed Irvin, but he only averted his eyes. Now, just like Nina, He believed that everyone should be responsible for their actions. Irvin soon realized that Pamela was given jail time. Irwin returned home, and the first thing he did was get rid of all of the things that bound him to his good-for-nothing wife. He found Pamela's telephone, turned it on, and looking through its contents, he came across a letter between Pamela and his friend. Pamela wrote that she needed the contacts of a reliable doctor who could make an official certificate of miscarriage to show it to Irvin, and her friend sent her a few numbers. Irvin was furious. It meant that she had cheated him with the baby too. And then he remembered his mother-in-law and her last request. After thinking for a while, he decided to go immediately to the cemetery. There he was met by the watchman. As it turned out, he was an old acquaintance of Mrs. Morgan's from her days at school. When the man heard that her son-in-law had come, he checked Irvin's documents for some reason and only then led him down the alley to Mrs. Morgan's grave. Along the way, the man talked about the woman's hard life and last days. She was a good woman. Here her husband was a jerk. At least he died early, and he didn't torment her with his adulteries for a long time. And her daughter was like him. She didn't care about her mother either. Mrs. Morgan called me before she died and asked me to take one thing from the apartment and bury it in her grave. She said it was for her son-in-law. "What is it?" asked Irvin. "You'll see by yourself. I offered her to let it stay with me, but your mother-in-law said it would be safer in the grave. I'm not immortal either." Barely saying this, the watchman stopped at the fresh grave. I tidied the grave a little, mowed the grass, planted flowers. "Mrs. Morgan's daughter didn't come here at all," said the watchman and handed Irvin a small shovel. "Here, dig a little bit here." "Why?" asked Irvin, still unable to believe what was happening. "Dig and I'll keep watch." And Irvin hesitantly picked up the shovel, and literally 5 minutes later, the shovel rattled against something iron. Irvin crouched down and took the box out of the ground. He opened it and marveled at the sight of ancient gold jewelry, set with so many precious stones, sparkling and glistening in all colors. There was a note attached to them. In it, Mrs. Morgan wrote that her ancestors belonged to a noble family, and these jewels passed to her by inheritance. The woman didn't want her foolish daughter to squander them all, so she decided to give them to Irvin, whom she had always considered her son, and knew that he would properly dispose of them. "Did you know what was inside?" whispered Irvin in amazement, looking at the watchman. "Of course," said the older man. "Why do you think I didn't take it for myself? I had a lot of respect for Mrs. Morgan, and she bequeathed me a couple of jewelry to take, so my grandchildren and I will have enough for a lifetime now." Irvin spent a little time at the grave and went away. Yes, he knew exactly what he was going to do now. He knew that the injured woman needed money for rehabilitation. After selling some jewelry, he wired her the necessary amount anonymously, but she still found out from whom the transfer came from and called to thank him. They chatted for a while, and Irvin wished her a speedy recovery. When he met her from the clinic 6 months later, she was already walking by herself. Soon, Nina and Irving began dating. He divorced Pamela and opened his own business. One day, Nina suggested that Irvin help Pamela get parole, because now she was healthy and she and Irvin were happy. He sometimes thought about it himself because Pamela's mother eventually made his happy life possible. But when he heard that from Nina, Irvin was surprised once again at what a responsive and reasonable woman she was. Irvin immediately found a good lawyer, and Pamela was soon released from jail. He never wanted to see her again, and Pamela did not want to communicate with him either. Irvin transferred a decent amount of money from the proceeds of the jewelry to her account. His ex-wife would have enough for 10 years of a comfortable life, and if she could use it properly, forever. By the way, Irvin took very little from that box for Nina and for his business, and Irvin's mother-in-law was right in the end. The money did not do Pamela any good. One day, when Irvin and Nina were walking in the park with their 2-month-old son, an unkempt-looking woman, obviously drunk, passed by and angrily said to him, "Well, are you enjoying your happy life?" Irvin turned around and could hardly recognize his ex-wife in this miserable woman. She stood, swaying and grinning, and when Irving asked how she was doing, she suddenly cried drunkenly and, through sobs interspersed with hiccups, told him that she had lost all her money and now no one wanted her. She tried to throw herself around Irvin's neck, but he pulled away, sat her down on the bench, and went away to his beloved wife and son, to his family, and Pamela let her sit alone and think about her wasted life, because it was all her own choice.